If you're not doing something crazy, then you're doing it wrong.
Hmm.
Let's just let that quote sink in for a moment.
Yeah, it's a powerful one.
Attributed to Larry Page, right? A
Yeah.
name everyone knows from Google, a company that, well, it really did reshape our world.
Profoundly.
And yet, despite building this incredibly influential company, Page himself was, well, famously private, almost reclusive, some might say.
Definitely not your typical spotlight-seeking CEO.
So this deep dive is really about trying to get past that public persona, trying to understand the mind, the thinking that shaped that whole era.
Absolutely. And he wasn't just focused on the next quarter's earnings report or what Microsoft was doing down the street.
Yeah.
His vision seemed much grander, almost, philosophical. Organizing the world's information, sure, that was the start. But also, how could technology tackle these huge society-level problems?
Right. And that quote, if you're not doing something crazy, then you're doing it wrong. It's not just like a catchy slogan, is it?
No, not at all. It feels like a core principle, a distillation of his entire philosophy towards innovation, towards risk.
Exactly. And that's our mission here in this deep dive, using the material you've provided us. We want to unpack that exact approach. We're not just going to retell the Google story. We want to dissect the underlying philosophy, the mindset, the strategic choices that drove Larry Page and Google itself to where it got.
And hopefully pull out some tools, some insights from that mindset.
Yeah. How can you, listening, maybe think a bit bigger, a bit bolder, more effectively, whatever it is you're working on?
Think of it as looking under the hood, right? At what drives extreme ambition and real innovation.
Good way to put it.
And it's relevant whether you're, say, an entrepreneur trying to build something new, or maybe an innovator stuck inside a big company trying to break the mold.
Or even if you're just curious. Curious about the thinking behind this digital world we all live in now.
Exactly. How do these massive world-changing ideas actually get started? How are they nurtured? How do they eventually, come to life? That's what we're exploring today, all through the lens of Larry Page's, let's call it his unique operating system.
Okay. So based on the material we have, it seems we can really break down his philosophy into 6 core pillars, interconnected ideas.
Yeah, they definitely seem to build on each other. They're not just random points. They form a coherent way of thinking.
So where should we start?
Well, let's kick off with the one that's probably most famous, the one that really became part of the Google DNA, you could say.
Okay, let's do it. Part 1. 10x thinking.
Right. 10x.
And this is, it's more than just a catchy phrase. It's really a direct challenge to just doing things incrementally better, a rejection of, mediocre progress.
Totally. The core idea, as the material lays it out, is basically don't settle for making something just 10% better. The goal, the mandate really, was always aiming for 10 times better.
10 times.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference.
It's a completely different way of approaching a problem. The material uses this great whiteboard analogy.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine you've got a problem written on a whiteboard. Most people, most companies, they look at it and think, okay, how can we tweak this existing thing? How do we optimize the current process?
Get that 10% efficiency gain, maybe cut costs by 10%.
Exactly. You're working within the lines that are already drawn on the board. You're sort of coloring inside the existing box.
But Page's view is different. He'd look at that same board and, say, let's erase it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
What if we wiped the slate clean? What if we weren't tied down by how things work today? How could we solve this in a way that gives us a 10 times improvement?
That forces you to just drop your assumptions, doesn't it?
Completely. You have to question the very foundation of what you're doing. You can't just optimize. You have to reimagine.
And the thinking behind it wasn't just pie-in-the-sky idealism. It was practical.
Right. According to the sources, he basically said, you can't solve big problems with small thinking. It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to do something huge like, I don't know, organize all the world's information or make every single book searchable or give free email to everyone, just making small improvements isn't going to get you there, not in any reasonable time frame.
You're just playing the same game as everyone else, maybe winning by a tiny margin.
Exactly. To really move the needle on something massive, you need a massive leap, a step change.
And this 10x idea wasn't just a suggestion at Google.
Oh, no. It was apparently baked into the culture. The material quotes an engineer who said something like, at other companies, if you bring up a really crazy, disruptive idea, it often gets shot down.
Yeah, layers of management, risk aversion.
Right. But at Google, it was the reverse. If your idea wasn't bold enough, if it didn't challenge things enough, the feedback might actually be, that's not really 10x enough.
Wow. So the danger wasn't being too ambitious.
The danger was being too timid. Think about how that flips the script on corporate culture and what gets rewarded. It pushes people way outside their comfort zone.
Into that space where real breakthroughs can happen.
Yeah, precisely.
So what's the classic example? The material must have one.
Oh yeah, the go-to example, detailed in the sources, is the launch of Gmail back in 2004.
Right, I remember that. What was the scene like then? Email was different.
Totally different. You had, Yahoo, Mail, Hotmail as the big players. And they gave you what? Maybe 2 megabytes, 4 megabytes of storage? It sounds insane now.
It was tiny. You were constantly deleting emails just to make space or archiving them offline.
It was a real chore. And forget about it. Searching your email was painful if it worked at all. Email was basically just a temporary holding place.
Okay, so that's the context. Then Google comes along in 2004 with Gmail.
And they offer 1 gigabyte of storage, 1 gigabyte for free.
Which, as the material points out, wasn't 10% more.
No, it was, 500 times more storage than the competition was offering? It seemed ludicrous, excessive. People literally thought it might be an April Fool's joke because they launched on April 1st.
Huh. Yeah, I remember that, adding to the confusion.
But it was dead serious. It was pure 10x thinking in action. Page and the team didn't ask, how can we give people a bit more storage?
Yeah.
They asked, what would email look like if you never had to delete anything? What if you could just keep it all forever? And to make that work, you needed, 2 things. Massive storage and really, really good search, which, of course, was Google's core strength.
And that's the strategic brilliance, right?
Yeah.
By reframing the problem that way, not improve email storage, but make deletion obsolete, you sidestep the competition entirely.
You're not playing their game anymore. You create a whole new standard. You redefine what users expect basically overnight. It wasn't just improving email. It was completely reimagining what email could be.
And this wasn't just a one-off thing for Gmail. The material suggests this 10x drive was behind a lot of Google's core stuff.
Yeah, it seems like it. Think about Google search itself in the early days, how much faster and more relevant it felt compared to Alta Vista or Lycos. Or the sheer ambition behind Google Maps mapping the entire planet. Or Android trying to get a smartphone OS onto, everything. Or even Google Translate tackling the massive barrier of language. They were all aiming for breakthroughs, not just tweaks.
But, okay, the material must touch on the downside, too. If you're always swinging for 10x...
You're going to strike out. A lot.
You're pushing into the unknown, trying things that maybe have never been done. Most attempts at a 10x jump probably don't land perfectly. Some fail completely.
But that's the inherent risk. It has to be. If you're succeeding all the time, you're probably not aiming high enough. Right.
Makes sense.
But Page's view, at least as it comes across in the sources, was that the risk of failure when pursuing something huge was actually less dangerous in the long run than the risk of just settling for mediocrity.
How so?
Because mediocrity, he seemed to feel, was like a slow, creeping failure, a gradual slide into irrelevance because you weren't bold enough. Failing spectacularly trying something big was almost preferable.
And that links to another quote in the material, something about limited time.
Yeah, we have such a short time to do something truly important, so why waste it working on something small?
That hits hard.
It really does. It flips the 10x ambition on its head. It's not just about making products better. It's about making the absolute most of your time, your resources, your talent, focusing them on things that could actually matter.
So working on something that only gives you a 10% gain feels like
a waste of precious time and potential that could have been poured into something genuinely game-changing.
Okay, so let's bring this home for the listener.
Yeah.
Thinking about this 10x idea.
Yeah, think about something you're working on right now, a project, maybe a goal you have. Is your default setting to think about making it 10% better?
What would happen if you forced yourself, just as an exercise, to think, how can I make this 10 times better? What assumptions would you have to ditch? What would you have to completely rethink from the ground up?
It's a challenging question, but potentially a really powerful one.
Okay, so building right on that theme of extreme ambition, let's shift from 10x thinking, which is often about dramatically improving something existing, to what the material calls part 2, the Moonshot Mindset.
Right. This is where we get into tackling those truly massive, almost impossible sounding problems.
Taking 10x and applying it to, like, societal challenges.
Kind of, yeah.
Right.
It's about aiming for solutions that seem, as the source puts it, borderline impossible at first glance. This is where that crazy idea from the opening quote, really finds its home.
Because, as the material points out, in most companies, if you propose something that sounds like science fiction,
You get the reality check, right, instantly. People list all the reasons it won't work. The tech isn't there, the market's not ready, it'll cost too much.
the antibodies kick in.
Exactly. But Page seemed to operate with a different filter. When faced with huge problems, climate change, road deaths globally, billions without internet access, his reaction wasn't, oh, that's too big. It was, okay, problems this big, need solutions just as big. Small incremental fixes just won't make a dent. So he actively looked for those borderline impossible ideas because only those had the potential scale to match the problem.
And this wasn't just a philosophy. He actually built something to house this thinking.
Right. That's where Google X came in later, just called X. The material is clear.
Yeah.
This wasn't just another R&D lab. It was specifically set up as a moonshot factory.
A moonshot factory. I like that.
Its job wasn't optimizing search ads or building the next Android version. It was a protected space, a place for scientists, engineers, designers to explore truly radical concepts, to ask those huge, almost naive-sounding what-if questions.
Like the ones the material mentions. What if we could cut traffic deaths to 0?
Notice that not reduce traffic deaths, but eliminate them. That word choice forces you way beyond just making cars safer. It pushes you towards rethinking transportation itself.
Or what if we could deliver internet everywhere using balloons?
I mean, that sounds completely nuts, right? High-altitude balloons, beaming down internet. It's literally a moonshot concept for connectivity.
And the self-driving car one. What if your car didn't need a driver at all? At that time, that was pure sci-fi for most people.
Absolutely. Confined to university labs and maybe some DARPA challenges. But Page was willing to put serious money and talent behind exploring if these what-ifs could actually become real.
Which goes back to the crazy idea again. Doing the crazy thing wasn't just allowed. It was kind of the point if you wanted transformative results.
Exactly. And these questions led to real projects. High risk, sure, but tangible. The material mentions Waymo, obviously, which came out of the self-driving car project and is now a leader in that space.
Project Loon.
Yeah, the internet balloons. A genuinely radical approach to infrastructure, even if it didn't ultimately become a standalone business in that form.
And Google Glass.
Google Glass. Maybe not a huge commercial hit initially, but It was pioneering work in wearable computing, in augmented reality. It was probing a possible future.
And it's important, as the material notes, that immediate commercial success wasn't the only measure for these moonshots.
Right. Loon got wound down eventually. But even projects that didn't turn into billion-dollar revenue streams weren't necessarily seen as failures inside X. The goal was bigger. It was about pushing technological boundaries, learning immense amounts, solving incredibly hard technical problems along the way, exploring what might be possible.
Which means embracing risk and failure even more than with 10X.
Oh, absolutely. Moonshots are inherently uncertain. You're betting on breakthroughs you can't schedule. Failure is not just possible, it's probable for many attempts.
And the material mentions that model they had at X.
Fail fast, learn faster.
That says it all, really.
It does. Failure isn't the end, it's data. It's a chance to learn something critical, maybe pivot, maybe apply the learning elsewhere. It's about maximizing how quickly you learn from pushing the envelope.
And Page's willingness to fund these things, protect them from short-term business pressures, even when they cost a lot and might fail publicly. That says something about his leadership style.
It really does. The material contrasts it with the typical focus on optimizing the current business, protecting today's profits. Page seemed to understand that while incremental thinking protects the present.
Moonshot thinking creates the future.
Exactly. You need both, perhaps, but someone needs to be placing those long-term, high-risk bets.
And there was a sense of responsibility, too, not just business opportunity.
The material suggests so. That if you have the resources, Google had the talent, the money, the tech capability, you almost have a moral obligation to try and tackle some of humanity's biggest challenges. It wasn't just optional, it was maybe even a duty.
Okay, so for you listening,
Yeah.
what are the really huge, daunting problems in your world, your industry, your community? And what if you let yourself think about a moonshot solution, something borderline impossible instead of just the usual fixes?
It's a perspective shift. Now, moving on, let's talk about part 3. Nonlinear thinking. This one's a bit more conceptual, but it's key to Page's strategy.
Okay, nonlinear thinking. How did he see technological progress differently?
Well, most people, most organizations, tend to plan for the future as if it's going to be a straight line extrapolation of the present. Things get a little better, a little faster, a little cheaper each year. Linear progress.
Steady improvement.
Right. But Page deeply understood that technology, especially computing technology, doesn't follow a straight line. It follows curves, often exponential curves.
Like Moore's Law.
Exactly. Moore's Law computing power doubling roughly every 2 years, costs plummeting. That wasn't just some abstract observation about silicon for him. It was a fundamental mental model, a way to think about the future across the board.
So, while others looked at today's tech limitations and planned around them,
Page looked at the trajectory. He saw the exponential curve and understood where technology was headed, not just where it was now. The material has him quoted saying something like, "The technology may not be ready today, but it will be, and probably sooner than you think."
believing in the curve.
Believing in the curve and acting on it. This gave him a huge strategic edge. It meant he could confidently invest in projects that looked completely premature, maybe even technically impossible, based on a linear projection. He wasn't scared off by today's hurdles if he believed the exponential trend would eventually solve them.
Okay, let's make that concrete. The material uses Google Translate as an example again.
Yeah, it's a great one for this. Remember how clunky machine translation used to be?
Oh, yeah. Barely usable for anything complex. Often hilarious, but not useful.
Right. A linear thinker looking at that early stuff would probably say, okay, truly good translation that understands nuance, that's decades away, maybe never. They'd invest cautiously.
But Page saw.
He saw two exponential curves converging: the explosion in raw computing power and the rapid improvement in machine learning algorithms fueled by that power and vast amounts of data. He understood that translation quality wouldn't just get slightly better each year, it would hit an inflection point and improve dramatically, exponentially.
So he bet big on that future trajectory.
Exactly. And look where we are now. Google Translate handles billions of requests a day, across hundreds of languages, with a quality that would have seemed like magic just 15 years ago. That's the payoff from betting on the exponential curve, not the linear crawl.
And self-driving cars fit this too.
Perfectly. A decade or so ago, the idea of a car driving itself through a busy city seemed like pure fantasy to most. The sensors were insanely expensive, the processing power needed was immense, the AI just wasn't there.
Linear thinking would say, not feasible for a long, long time.
But Page saw multiple exponential trends happening in parallel. Sensors like LiDAR getting dramatically cheaper and better, processing power continuing its relentless doubling, AI and machine learning making huge leaps. He didn't wait for it all to be cheap and perfect. He looked at where those curves were heading and started building for that future intersection point.
So the core idea of nonlinear thinking is, don't build for today's limitations. Identify the key exponential trends and build for where they're taking the world.
Precisely. It's like building broadband infrastructure when everyone's still on dial-up, or designing a mobile OS when most phones are still basic flip phones. You're skating to where the puck is going to be.
And this changes how you even frame the problems you're trying to solve.
Totally. A linear thinker might ask, how do we reduce traffic jams by 10%? Important, sure. But Page, thinking non-linearly about autonomous tech, could ask, how do we eliminate traffic jams and accidents entirely? Because the exponential curve potentially opens up that possibility.
The material has another Page quote here about companies failing because they miss the future.
Yeah, lots of companies don't succeed over time. What do they fundamentally do wrong? They usually miss the future. That really frames his nonlinear thinking as a survival strategy. It was his way of trying not to miss the future, trying not to get blindsided by exponential change.
Okay, so the challenge for you listening, where might you be assuming linear progress in your world? What exponential trends, tech, social, economic, could rewrite the rules? And how would your plans change if you started building for that nonlinear future instead of just today?
Deep questions. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Let's move to part 4, creative culture. Page knew you couldn't just will 10x ideas or moonshots into existence. You needed an engine.
An idea engine.
Exactly. He believed great products start with great ideas, and great ideas flourish in a culture that actually welcomes them, nurtures them. Google was intentionally designed, as the material puts it, to be an idea machine.
And how did they try to build that machine? He didn't think innovation only happened in dedicated labs.
No, he recognized it could spark anywhere, from engineers, designers, anyone, really, given the freedom to chase their curiosity. He wanted an environment where those sparks weren't extinguished by bureaucracy, but fanned into flames.
Which leads to the famous 70-20-10 rule.
Right. The material breaks it down. Basically, 70% of your time on your main job, your core projects, 20% on projects related to that core work, maybe extensions or improvements, and then the crucial 10%.
Pure freedom time.
Pure freedom. Work on whatever you want.
Yeah.
Any idea, even if it seems totally unrelated to Google's business or your day job.
That 10% feels radical, even now.
It really was. In most places, spending a tenth of your week on a personal passion project unrelated to your KPIs would be frowned upon, right? A distraction.
Or worse.
But at Google, under Page, that 10% time was seen as an investment, a potential source of the next big thing. And the material even says that if your 10% or 20% project took off, it could lead to recognition, even promotions. It wasn't just tolerated, it was encouraged.
And did it work? Did major things come out of it?
Oh, yeah. The material lists some huge ones. Gmail, which we already talked about as a 10x example, famously started as a 20% project.
Wow, okay.
AdSense, the advertising platform that became a massive revenue driver for Google, also started life in that exploration time.
What else?
Google News, the automated news aggregator, even early versions of the Chrome browser were apparently incubated in this kind of flexible time before becoming huge official projects.
So it wasn't just a gimmick. It actually produced significant results.
It seems so. It was a deliberate strategy to basically give people permission to invent, to follow interesting paths that didn't fit neatly onto a roadmap. It signaled trust in people's creativity.
And beyond just the time allocation, the culture mattered too. Less management.
Yeah, the material stresses that. A culture of trust, trying to minimize layers of bureaucracy and micromanagement. There's that quote from Page, "We don't have as many managers as other companies. People need to be free to think and do."
Believing that hierarchy kills creativity.
Essentially, that too much oversight, too much needing permission just stifles the very innovation you need for breakthroughs.
And think about that 10% or 20% time applied across thousands of really smart, motivated people.
Exactly. The sheer number of potential innovations being explored simultaneously becomes enormous. It's not chaos, the material suggests, but more like structured serendipity. You're just increasing the odds of bumping into something amazing.
And it wasn't just for senior people.
No, the culture apparently encouraged anyone to contribute ideas, challenge things, pitch new concepts. Didn't matter if you were an intern or a VP, the material makes that point. Great ideas don't have job titles.
Love that.
They can pop up anywhere.
But Page didn't expect every single 10% project to succeed, right?
Of course not. Most probably went nowhere. But the expectation wasn't success for every single one. The expectation was to try, to use that time to explore something promising, even if it turned out to be a dead end.
Because that exploration itself is valuable.
Yes. As the material implies, it's how you stumble upon the things everyone else misses because they're too busy executing the plan. You have to risk time on the unknown.
Okay, so for you listening, how do you carve out time for your own exploration? Is there space, formal or informal, for pursuing ideas outside your main duties? And does your environment encourage that kind of curiosity, or does it subtly discourage it?
Food for thought. Right, next up, part 5, mission-driven focus. This is about how Page navigated the, let's face it, incredibly competitive tech world.
Right. How did he keep Google focused when everyone's reacting to everyone else?
Well, the material points out a key difference. A lot of companies get obsessed with their rivals, constantly watching them, copying features, playing defense.
Getting bogged down in competitive battles.
Exactly. Page seemed to actively resist that. He thought obsessing over competitors was basically a path to just being average. It stops you from thinking independently, you just end up reacting.
So instead of looking outwards at competitors, he looked inwards.
Towards the mission. The material emphasizes this mission as Google's true north, its compass. Are we doing something that truly helps people at scale? That was the filter.
That question cuts through a lot of noise.
It really does. Competitive moves, internal politics, short-term market fluctuations, you judge them against that core mission. Is this really helping users in a significant way? That guided product decisions, acquisitions, strategy?
Can we see this in action? Like when Apple launched the iPhone. That must have been a huge moment.
Massive. Seismic. And yeah, a lot of mobile companies at the time freaked out, started desperately trying to make iPhone clones, purely reactive.
But Google didn't just try to copy the iPhone.
No. The material shows the response wasn't build a better iPhone. It was to double down on Android, but with their mission in mind. Their goal wasn't just premium hardware, it was universal access to information. The phone was the key future gateway for billions.
Especially in places where people couldn't afford an expensive iPhone.
Exactly. So while Apple went high-end, closed ecosystem, Google went open source with Android. aimed for massive adoption across all kinds of devices, all price points. The goal wasn't beating the iPhone feature for feature. It was fulfilling the mission of getting powerful computing and information access into everyone's hands.
And the result? Android is on, what, over 3 billion devices now?
Yeah, the scale is incredible, and that scale came from sticking to the mission, pursuing a different path, not just reacting to a competitor's brilliant product.
Even inside Google, for product decisions, the key question wasn't, are we beating Microsoft?
No, the material says the litmus test was, is this good for the user? That user-centric, mission-first focus gave them clarity. It let them make bold moves that maybe didn't make immediate competitive sense, but served the long-term mission.
Like open sourcing Android, that seemed crazy to some.
Totally. Or launching Chrome when Internet Explorer owned the world and the browser wars seemed over.
Yeah, why bother?
Or buying YouTube back in 2006. Online video was still pretty basic, lots of cat videos, seen as maybe a fad. But Google saw it through the lens of their mission, a future way people would access and share information.
So these weren't just reactions, they were mission-aligned bets.
Exactly. They could see how these things fit the bigger picture of organizing information and making it accessible, even if the market didn't get it right away.
And the strategic benefit is you end up playing a different game.
Often, yeah. The material suggests that while competitors are fighting over the current territory, the mission-driven company can actually redefine the territory entirely. Leapfrog the competition because you're focused on a bigger, more fundamental goal.
For Page, it wasn't just about winning in tech.
It was about changing how technology served the world, guided by that mission. The success was almost a byproduct of staying true to that.
Okay, so reflecting on that, what's your core mission in your work, your project, even your life? And are you letting the competition, whatever form that takes, distract you from it?
Powerful question. Okay, last pillar, part 6, invention plus execution. This brings it all together.
Because brilliant ideas are great, but
they're not enough. Page understood this deeply. The material uses that great quote about Tesla.
right, invention is not enough. Tesla invented electric power. You need to combine invention with innovation focus and the ability to get it to people.
That nails it. A genius idea, a breakthrough invention, means nothing if it stays in the lab. Its potential is only unlocked when you execute, when you get it out into the world effectively.
So every moonshot, every big idea needed 2 engines.
That's how Page seemed to see it. Engine 1, the invention, the creative spark, imagining the future. Engine 2, execution, the relentless drive to make that future real, usable, scalable.
And execution wasn't just an afterthought.
Not at all. It meant pushing teams to obsess over the details. Distribution, usability, speed, reliability, the infrastructure to handle billions of users. It wasn't enough to have a smart search algorithm. It had to be instant everywhere.
Not enough to create Android.
It had to run reliably on thousands of different phones and reach billions of people.
And the scale of Google's main products really shows that focus on execution.
Absolutely. Search became the internet's front door because it just worked reliably, instantly. Android dominates mobile because they executed on partnerships and development for mass adoption. Maps is global infrastructure now. That's execution at scale.
And the alphabet structure helped with this, separating the core execution from the next wave invention.
That seems to be part of the rationale described in the material. Let Google focus on executing and optimizing its massive core products, while places like X or DeepMind focus on inventing the next things. But even for those new ventures, the rule still applied. Eventually, execution matters.
An idea needs a path to the real world.
Yes. Moonshots had to solve a real problem and have a plausible, real path to the world, a way to actually reach users and make an impact. For Page, the loop wasn't closed until someone was actually benefiting from the invention.
And that final point from the material really sums it up.
What's the point of a genius idea if it never leaves the lab? Brilliance, for Page, wasn't just the idea itself. It was the idea made real, making a difference. Shared brilliance.
Okay, so for you listening, think about your own great ideas. Where are they stuck? Are they still just concepts? What's needed to bridge that gap between invention and execution? What does delivering it to the world actually look like?
Bringing it down to earth.
So let's try and synthesize all this. We've gone through these 6 pillars, from the material 10x thinking, moonshot mindset, nonlinear thinking, creative culture, mission focus, and invention plus execution. It paints a picture of, well, more than just a CEO.
It really does. It shows someone operating from a fundamentally different framework, a different way of seeing problems, opportunities, and the role of technology.
It's a mindset where Huge ambition isn't seen as reckless, but almost as responsible.
Yeah, responsible when facing big challenges.
Mm.
And where crazy ideas aren't just tolerated but actively sought out.
And where innovation isn't just the aha moment, but also the hard, persistent work of making it real for millions or billions.
We covered 10x thinking, that drive for step change improvement.
The moonshot mindset, daring to tackle a borderline impossible.
Nonlinear thinking, building for that exponential future, not just today.
The creative culture, trying to build that idea machine.
Mission over competition, staying focused on the core purpose.
And invention plus execution. The idea has to reach the world.
And the really key takeaway, I think, from the material is that these aren't just for Larry Page or Google. You don't need billions of dollars or a campus full of PhDs to start applying these ways of thinking.
Right. This isn't exclusively a Silicon Valley playbook. It's about how you approach challenges, wherever you are.
It starts with asking bigger questions, like Page did. Asking yourself, as the material prompts, am I actually working on the right problem here? Is this problem significant enough?
Am I aiming high enough? Or am I playing it too safe, settling for small wins when a leap might be possible?
And maybe the trickiest one. Am I designing for where the world is going, not just where it is now? Am I anticipating those curves, or am I stuck in today's reality?
Just asking those bigger, harder questions and then having the guts to pursue the answers, that's where the potential for real impact comes from.
Page's genius maybe wasn't just tech. It was that combination of extreme ambition, a unique way of thinking about the future, and building a culture that could actually execute on those big ideas at incredible scale.
It was the refusal to think small.
Yeah, the absolute refusal.
So, okay, let's leave our listeners with a final thought, a challenge maybe. If this deep dive into Page's mindset has sparked anything for you,
an idea, a question, a nagging feeling that maybe you could aim higher,
let that be the start. Maybe it's time to think beyond just optimizing what you already do. Time to imagine what could be truly transformative.
Ask yourself, what is my moonshot? What's that bold idea, that big challenge, that thing I've been putting off because it feels too big, too crazy, too impossible right now?
Maybe the tech isn't quite ready. Maybe the timing feels off. But what if you started thinking about it through these lenses? Aiming for 10x, betting on that non-linear future, giving yourself that 10% time to just explore it.
Just asking the question is the first step. Imagining what might be possible if you adopted even one or two of these principles.
Because the future, well, it doesn't just happen to us, does it?
No, it gets built. It gets built by people bold enough to imagine it differently, and then, crucially, determined enough to turn that imagination into reality.